Morning, Ishika. How are you doing? Good morning. How are you doing? Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. How are you doing? You okay?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Let's make a quick start. We're going to be looking at starting a new unit today, which is basically to do with principles of operation management. And I'm going to look at doing a bit of an introduction today, and then after the presentation and discussion, I'll get the 4 presentations, for the 4 learning outcomes uploaded so that we are able to, I was just finishing off some of them, so I just wanted to finish them today and then get them uploaded so that you're able to read into them before these sessions. So today and tomorrow's session will cover learning outcome 1. Today we'll discuss a bit of introduction and then also go into learning outcome 1. And then later on, what we are going to do is tomorrow cover learning outcome 2. So the assignment briefs and books recommended are already up on Moodle, and that should be something which will be for additional reading as we go along studying this particular unit. We're going to do a quick start with a bit of a video, which will actually lay down a bit of introduction for us in terms of what this unit entails and what this unit actually helps us cover. There are 2 perspectives in terms of videos, so obviously what I'm going to try and do is show both of them, which are a couple of minutes in terms of videos, but I think it gives us a very good understanding in terms of how operations management work in different contexts, because these videos typically show different contexts of or in terms of how different. Okay, let's do this. So how different people perceive, operations management, and I think it'll be a good thing for us to, start with that aspect. So let me just. Done. Perfect. So we have a beautiful 31. Do this. So let's look at the videos first, and then we'll go into a bit of detail with regards to the introduction of the unit. So let me just share the screen. Okay, here we go. So I've got a couple of videos. Let's look at the first one, which is a brief video on defining what is the what is operations management.
Today, I'll talk about operations management. In our day-to-day lives, we routinely deal with both physical goods as well as services. But where do these products or services come from? This is where operations management comes into play. Looking closely at the production of such goods, we're able to take a peek inside the black box, which is the production process. Operations management can be defined as the management of the entire process that transfers inputs into outputs. Outputs are said physical goods or services. Inputs can be material, manpower, and machines. Here's an example from the car industry. The material, metal in this case, is supposed to be reshaped by a machine. This machine, a press in our example, is operated by a machine operator. The metal thus becomes, through the transformation process, a finished component, which is assembled on a car as the output of this process. A central aspect of operations management is the improvement of the transformation processes, which can be accomplished by concepts such as total quality management, Kanban, or total productive maintenance.
This is a very short video which basically emphasizes what is operations management. And, basically from that video, if you see, we get 2 things. One, with regards to understanding that this is the process through which companies essentially have some inputs. They do some processing, which is manufacturing, engineering, things which is reshaping some of the material. raw materials into finished goods, and then you get an output, and that output basically is then sold to or different customers, manufacturers. It could be suppliers, or even in some cases is used as an input or as raw material to produce other products. So input, process, output tends to be the aspect of one definition of, operations management. Let's look at another one just to understand what is operations management as a process.
Operations is a large term for several smaller subjects. When a company wants to operate smoothly, grow their business, satisfy customers, and make money, operations management is at work. E-commerce, global competition, customer service, productivity, and quality are all parts of operations management. Without globalization, it is impossible for a company to expand to a larger, more beneficial market. If a company does not have good customer service, then it will not have satisfied customers, and therefore no business and no profit. Productivity and quality must be at a maximum in order for them to make the most money for a business. All of these elements need to work together to create a successful business. So, what exactly is operations management? Operations management is the management of systems or processes that create goods or provide services. Let's start with goods. Goods are defined as physical items that include raw materials, parts, and sub-assemblies, as well as final products such as cell phones and automobiles. These goods cost the consumer money and are sold by a business. Services, on the other hand, are activities that provide some combination of time, location, form, or psychological value. These are also provided by a business. Examples of goods and services can be found all around us. All businesses have a supply chain. A supply chain is a process that is put in place by a company in order to gather materials, produce, and distribute their product. These supply chains can include a business's facilities, functions, and activities that are involved in producing and delivering a product or service. A supply chain sequence begins with raw materials and concludes at the final product which the customer purchases. There are three types of interrelated processes that businesses are composed of. These processes include upper management processes, operational processes, and supporting processes. Each of these is different and corresponds to different levels of a company, similar to their titles. All businesses, no matter what size, use these basic processes to produce and provide the products and services that we, as consumers, desire. Operations management includes many activities that a company uses to allow it to run more smoothly. These include forecasting, capacity planning, facilities and layout, scheduling, managing inventories, assuring quality, motivating and training employees, locating facilities, purchasing, distribution, and maintenance. Forecasting involves identifying trends in a company's past data in order to plan for the future. This allows for a company to be able to order raw materials, hire and fire employees, and identify the products that will be the most profitable in the near future. Forecasting goes hand in hand with capacity planning as well as purchasing. These activities would not be completed accurately without forecasting. Managing inventories also is closely related to capacity planning, purchasing, and forecasting. However, inventories are managed more often and with less lead time than the previously mentioned activities. Distribution is similar to managing inventories because of the lack of lead time given before a product needs to arrive to a customer. Motivating and training employees is an activity connected to assuring quality for the company. If a company's employees are motivated and excited to work, then the quality of a product is going to be better than if an employee didn't have that motivation. Placement of facilities is essential in the distribution of products to the customer and even the transportation of raw materials to a company. Locating the placement of a facility is based on the closeness of a supplier, as well as the cost of distribution and the distance to customers. So, why learn about operations management? Businesses are created to be profitable and successful. Things like forecasting, location planning, and quality assurance are essential in creating a profitable business. Without these tools, that wouldn't be possible.
So as you can see, what we've got in this particular video was pretty much everything that we are going to cover as far as the unit of operations management is concerned. It talked about concepts like forecasting, planning, maintenance, processes, motivation, effectiveness, and how quality side of things can actually work, and motivation and other bits kind of, let's say, influence the quality of products which the company is manufacturing. Let's listen into this last bit, which also provides a very different perspective of what is operations management.
Are required to make decisions in 8 key areas. Some of these are more strategic, whereas others are more tactical. We'll be considering 4 of the more strategic areas. They involve high-level planning decisions about how an organization will get from where it is now to where it wants to be. These areas are strategic operations management, product design, supply chain management, and quality management. The first area, strategic operations management, involves long-term, broad considerations about the viability of a business. How will it create value for customers and gain a competitive advantage? For example, you might need to answer a question like, what are the unique features of our apparel business that make it competitive? Successful strategic operations management aligns an organization's operations to an overall business strategy. A second area is product design. This is where you make decisions about the features of a product or service. What features will make it a success? For example, a decision about which features to include in the next release of a company's cell phone line may greatly impact the success of the phones. A third important area where operations managers make decisions is supply chain management. This involves managing, monitoring, and controlling all activities along the supply chain. It's about deciding how to guarantee the timely, cost-effective acquisition of inputs and delivery of outputs to customers. For example, you might need to decide which suppliers to use and how best to transport goods to retail outlets. A fourth area is quality management. This involves determining how to measure and maintain quality and how to identify and resolve quality problems. For example, you'll need to decide what to test to check the quality of a product or service. On a daily basis, operations managers make decisions that are key to the running of their organizations. Knowing what strategic areas to consider can make you more effective in your role and add to your organization's success.
So this particular video helps us understand decision-making process, which is primarily involved in operations management. So these are all aspects of areas that we are going to look at today in terms of our coverage on the unit, which is operations management. So let me just quickly briefly switch you over to the unit spec that we are looking at. So basically, if you look at the unit introduction, the introduction talks about operations management being everywhere. That means in every organization, when they start looking at growing, when they start looking at increasing business, when they start looking at getting more customers, when they start looking at manufacturing product and services through mass production, you would generally see the word operations management starts to come in, because the business is well set, the organization is well set, it has all the resources it needs available to be able to expand. And what you'll generally see in that context is the operationalization of the business has to be done. That means increasing the efficiency and output of the business has to be done. And that would lead to the company or the organization essentially producing goods in vast quantities. And these vast quantities of goods being produced would also mean one of the things that was mentioned in one of the videos is that operations management requires globalization. So when we look at mass manufacturing of goods and services, then at that stage we can clearly say that the company is looking at globalization or has entered the phase of globalization, and that is where the company's products and services need the operations management as a component, as a key process within the organization to be able to expand and grow the business to increase profits. Now, the other perspective of operations management is that it is very closely related to other topics like supply chain management, looking at some of the quality management techniques like Kanban, lean manufacturing, agile. These are techniques just in time. These are techniques which have been introduced over the years and in different places, and they have now become a part and parcel of operations management. You'd also see quality management to a certain extent being a part of operations management, but although it tends to be a different field, but sometimes they will go hand in hand in order to help the company expand its operations or improve the quality of products. And that is where processes which basically bring across more efficiency and more, savings in terms of time, cost, and quality would be simultaneously implemented, and decisions on that would be taken by the people who work within operations management. So one of the videos also showcased the role of an operations manager, and one of the key roles of the operations manager is to look at making decisions. Some of these decisions are strategic decisions, some of these decisions are tactical decisions, and the whole idea of doing and making these decisions is to primarily ensure that the company is able to produce, manufacture, supply, and cater to the demands of consumers and its customers when it comes to products and services. So there, the focus is on streamlining processes which will allow organization to achieve efficiency and effectiveness, and thereby helping it to achieve its objectives. Now, when we look at the end result that we want to achieve in this unit, we are looking at you getting a very detailed overview of how operations, logistics, and supply chain work within a particular organization. And a lot of models that we are going to be looking at discussing, theoretical models, will be focused around getting you knowledge and insights into these three key areas, which is operations within an organization, related to how logistics side of things work, and supply side of things works. And that would be the essence of studying this particular unit. Now, the unit has 4 learning outcomes. Most Pearson units, as you know, have 4 learning outcomes. So we'll be covering learning outcome 1 and 2. There'll be 1 assignment after that, and learning outcome 3 and 4. There'll be a second assignment after that. So today's focus will be to look at going into detailing of understanding how do we analyze the effectiveness of operations management in contributing to organizational objectives. And this could be across a wide range of organizations. So we could pick up financial services, operations, management could be related to, various side of operations in financial services, retailing, marketing, manufacturing, engineering, or in some cases, you could even look at, say, for example, IT side of things like call center operations. So this concept would apply across in terms of bringing across effectiveness in the operations of the organization. And in this context, we're going to be looking at definition of operation and operation management. We'll also be looking at how operations management has evolved. It has seen 3 phases of evolution, if I put it this way, from craft production or craft manufacturing to basically mass, customization of products. And we'll look at some bit of brief history in terms of, the period before 1800s. Then we look at period in the 1900s, and then we look at the modern 20th century, evolution of how operations management as a field or as a subject has evolved in the context of, history. We'll also be looking at roles and functions of operations management. So we'll be looking at the POLC cycle, which is an important theoretical aspect that we need to be aware of, which is planning, organizing, leading and controlling, and in some cases it is called the POCC, which is coordinating and controlling cycle. We'll be looking at some of the strategic, tactical, and operational objectives of operation management and how it contributes. So sometimes in organizations, you would generally see a triangle or a pyramid being formed, wherein strategic decisions are taken by the top management, operational decisions are taken, tactical decisions are taken by the middle managers, and then the operational decisions, which are day-to-day decisions, which are taken by the junior management or the people working within the front lines of the company or organization. So we look at understanding them in a bit of detail. We'll go into some of the bits which basically understands and gives us an overview of what are the scope of operations management when we look at different types of organizations, when we consider ownership, private sector, public sector, non-for-profit or charitable organizations, and how do they use this, let's say, area or concept in day-to-day running of their operations. This is a bit of an activity which I would expect you guys to do at some stage, which is to look at different career roles and opportunities within, operations management, and different career opportunities. When we look at within the role of operations management would typically involve, things like who is an operations manager. We'll be looking at things like logistics manager and role of logistics manager, supply chain analyst or specialist, and then operations analyst. And then with the context of career opportunities, we'll also be looking at discussing skills. And these skills, would be would have to be looking at, say for example, looking at soft skills, and then also looking at, let's say technical skills. And what we'll do is basically do a quick bit of differentiation with regards to these two types of skills. And within these skills, how does an operation manager, why do you think we need to have both these types of skills, and how does the operation manager use these skills to, function on a day-to-day basis? And then there are 3 or 4 theoretical perspectives that we need to consider in learning outcome 1, which is to talk about transformation model of input and outputs, which is a key theoretical framework in operations management. We'll also look at the 4V framework, which is volume, variety, variation, and visibility framework. And then PESTLE as a framework, which will be used to analyze or look at how does, let's say different factors, which are different environmental factors or factors from outside, essentially help or affect the operations of the organization. And in that, what we're going to do is not consider something generic like political economic, but we look at using PESTLE to discuss globalization as a factor and sustainability as a factor. So we'll talk about some of the advantages and challenges the organizations face when they are looking at contemporary issues related to operations management. And then we look at similar things with regards to global and ethical outsourcing of suppliers and supplies when it comes to operations management. So a lot of companies outsource manufacturing in order to find cheaper raw material and labor and manufacturing cost, and what are the basic remits where we need to look at discussing ethical and moral responsibilities of organizations when they look at essentially outsourcing some of these operations to other countries or facilities, and what are they required to follow when we look at these suppliers and supplier guidelines with regards to ethics side of things. So there's a fair bit of indicative content in learning outcome 1, because I think it lays down the framework for also understanding some of the basics of the unit, and that is where what we are going to do is skim through some parts of it, so that some parts of it you are going to cover with activities and a bit of self-study at your end. So in this unit, I've explained the aims. This is some of the indicative content just we've gone through briefly. Let's look at quickly 2-3 things with regards to how do we look at operations management from a point of view of, definition? For example, when we say the word operation and when we use the word operations management. So when we look at the word operation in context of, business and management, it will refer to activities like tasks and processes that a business needs to carry out on a day-to-day basis to produce goods or services that it provides to its customers. And simple example of this that I would give you is, for example, if you're studying with UK Versity, one of the operational things at our end is to basically look at having resources which are made available to learners to be able to study, courses with us. So things like books, presentations, handouts, articles, journals, recorded video lectures. These are basically part and parcel of, activities and tasks and processes that we use or create. And using some of these processes, we create some of the output which is required for learners to be able to study these courses with us. And that would be the essence of operations within an educational institution. It would basically, if we were to take an example of, in one of the videos, we looked at an example of car manufacturing within an organization, and that would encompass things like procuring raw material, iron, or some of the other bits required for producing the chassis or the body of the car. And then by employing a manufacturing process, this raw material will be converted into finished product or semi-finished product, which will then be assembled in the factory to produce a car. And that car would then be, obviously delivered to the dealership, and from the dealership, it will be sold to the customer. And that car or that truck or that vehicle in terms of delivery van would then be used for various services by customer or customers in this case to, solve certain objectives. And that would essentially be the process of operations when we look at any type of organization. If you look at a call center, typically in that case, customers calling the call center and then receiving support to be able to resolve that problem, whether it's a banking issue or if it's a call center related to, just generally providing answers to certain queries. When you call services in any sort of utility-based company like gas, electric, or whatever, and they help you resolve that problem, they provided you that service, and that essentially, has helped you move ahead with your side of things. And that would be termed as, this providing of these services through the phone would be termed as operations. Now, when we talk about the word and we add the word management would mean that we are going to try and structure things in such a way that it then has what is called a proper design and a proper control mechanism. And also it will then allow some of these things to be done meticulously and periodically to be able to replicate those processes from a point of view of the organization using it to mass produce some of these goods. So a simple set of operations would be to produce and assemble a car. But if the company or the management decides that we're going to be running 3 shifts within the factory, and these 3, each shift would require to produce certain number of vehicles, for example, 80 to 100 vehicles or 100 vehicles every shift in 8 hours, then you're looking at controlling, coordinating, and directing, and then organizing the efficiency of the factory in such a way that it is able to, manufacture and then deliver finished goods, as per the processes which have been set, and that would be the process of management. So here, in order to bring overall efficiency to the, manufacturing process of the car and assembly line, what will the management do is basically look at our planning to ensure that enough raw material, enough manpower, trained people, facilities, resources are available. They will look at organizing this in a way which will allow it to run 3 shifts in the factory. There will be sufficient amount of resources, manpower, trained manpower available to be able to carry out these functions. Then they will put factory managers or operation managers in place to be able to coordinate some of these functions, so that the operations on the assembly of the car line can be run efficiently in terms of without any breakdowns, without any issues. And then the management will control the flow of resources, any sort of resources happening, so that it is not leading to any wastage. And if there are areas identified primarily for problems or issues, there is a continuous process of improving those processes so that on a day-to-day basis, some of these functions are essentially running smoothly and thereby helping the company to achieve the goal or the let's say the objective which has been set to run 3 shifts and produce 300 cars a day from the factory. And that bit of planning, organizing, controlling, and coordinating in terms of ensuring that the resources are able to provide the desired output will be termed as the management side of things. Now, we've gone through some of these videos in the beginning, so I'll not replay them, but I put the links here so that you are able to watch these videos and look at 3 different perspectives of what is operations management, the strategic side of operations management, and decision side of operations management, and how it is very closely related to logistics, supply chain, and quality management side of things. And that is where 3 videos, I think one was not justified, and you had to look at 3 different types to be able to understand 3 different perspectives of how big and vast this field is and how closely it works with some of the other areas to be able to when an organization decides to go global, or it starts to increase production and increase its customer base, why does it need the operations management as a field or as a function within the organization to run it and manage it successfully? Now, excuse me, let's look at a bit of a quick activity. And this quick activity, what I want to do is just to get to understand it, because when we look at the field of operations management, it is a vast field, and we are looking at studying just one unit. This could be a full subject that you could study when you do specializations. For example, in engineering or any sort of a business field, you could also do, business management degree with operations management as a specialization in the final year. But sticking to what we've got in terms of indicative content, what I want to do is just put a bit of perspective into when we look at, understanding what we've covered so far in terms of basic definitions and, the background by looking at some of the videos. Now, let's consider a business, different types of businesses, and let's identify what are the main outputs in terms of operations these businesses would produce. So what do you think a brewery, will produce as an output? Any ideas? What does a publisher produce? What does a hotel offer? What does an insurance company offer? And if you work within a company, what does your organization offer? So say, for example, if you look at UK Versity, in terms of our organization, we offer online courses. So the operational aspect of running, teaching, assessing, verifying, and certification would basically be the offering, which is online courses. So what does some of the other businesses, do in terms of operations? What will be the main output of their, business? So let's look at a brewery. What would be the output?
Probably alcohol, beer.
So in this case, the output is going to be beer. What would a publisher be, doing?
A book.
Okay, it could be a book, it could be an article, it could be a newspaper, it could
Journal.
be a sorry, Shika, what?
I say journal.
Yeah, that's correct. Journal, yes. So a publisher could be producing books, magazines, articles, newspapers, journals. That is good. What would be the output of a hotel?
Accommodation, meals.
So in this case, here it will provide, say, for example, rooms, or it will also be looking at providing stay and accommodation for a hotel. What do you think an insurance company would have an output or in terms of its product?
Insurance package.
Sorry, it will be an insurance policy. It will be basically looking at covering the financial risk, which which you say, for example, if you drive a car and you take out a financial insurance, you take out an car insurance policy, what you're looking at is if in the eventuality, if you ever get hit or you have an accident, then you have covered your financial risk, which is the cost of replacing the car, and that would be essentially the output of a insurance company. And then your organization, for in our case, UK Versity, we are looking at obviously, delivery of online courses. So when we look at operations management, one of the things that you're going to be focused on understanding would be input, process, and output. So we need to be clear what a company or an organization would do, what their role of or their field of operations will be, and what kind of output would they produce. Now, let's look at very briefly the historical perspective of operations management. Now, operations has been there from wherever we can actually recollect our memory. So people have been producing, for example, crops. If you look at agriculture, people have been farming, but farming is the process, and the output that we get is wheat, corn, maize, barley. So the output, rice, that is the output. But the process that we would say is being followed by farmers is agriculture. The input is going to be seeds, and the output is going to be a finished crop that they would harvest. And this process of how it will run is basically operations. Now, so operations, manufacturing, agriculture, if we look at in general as a field, has been there for ages, or since the origins of mankind. People have been harvesting crop or growing crops, and obviously that is basically looking at the startups of, let's say, operation. But generally, if we look at over time, there are three different phases through which we see operations management is involved. Now, one of the figures which I put in the side is basically a figure which essentially helps understand when does operations management actually enter or become a common, not say a common, but an important area of discussions within the organization. So if we look at the 18th century, we had basically what is called craft production. And when we talk about, the area of craft production, what we are generally looking at talking in this case is, original methods, for example, of, manufacturing or a bit of operations that we generally get to see, which is basically, say, our agriculture side of things happening. And they would be, the part which we look at craft production. After that, we went into mass production, and then mass customization is what we are currently looking at in terms of the 21st century. So you see customization on every sort of products being made possible, and that is because of the era wherein we are specializing or customizing these outputs or products, but these products might not be generally changing. So when we talk about craft manufacturing, looking at the three phases before the 18th century, we look at these being processes employed by people who were called tradesmen or skilled craftsmen, and they were looking at producing goods in volume. So, for example, somebody looking at producing a pottery, a potter essentially producing pottery. If we look at in the olden days, if they start producing potteries in volume, they would be considered as, under the era of craft manufacturing. But when factories took over, you had this being produced in, volumes. When I say volumes, I mean hundreds and thousands of them being produced. So cups and saucers, plates and, glasses being produced in thousands on a daily basis within a pottery factory would then go into mass manufacturing. So here we had skilled craftsmen or tradesmen essentially doing certain bits of roles which were essentially required in producing small scale goods or, output in terms of, let's say, products which were in demand by the customer. So sometimes we look at furniture manufacturing companies, we look at clock making companies, you generally see that they involve a significant feature which is called utilization of skilled manpower. And they are skilled in terms of producing them as output. And their output generally tends to be a couple of hundreds or a couple of, tens of pieces every day. They might not be mass producing, some of these objects because they require skills. And in some cases, it is basically skills which are transferred from one generation to the other. And that is where it is called craft manufacturing. Mass production as an era is what we see which is generally termed as industrialization. So here we see factories, people starting to work in factories after World War I and II. And what we generally see that lots of goods which were being, earlier produced in smaller quantities, started to being produced in large quantities. And large quantities also meant that they were being manufactured in factories and they were being sold and exported or imported into other countries as well. Now, when we look at this process or this part of the era wherein we talk about mass production, we generally see that this started after World War II, when industrialization started to happen, and because there was a huge need for some of these products and services across the globe, they could only be manufactured and mass produced in factories. And this process essentially we see wherein factories utilizing goods which were coming as input material from other locations, which are suppliers or contractors providing it, and then the factories producing the assembled or on the assembly line assembling these goods and then producing the finished good, which was then sold to customers. So here essentially what we look at is, in order to increase production and keep the costs low, companies started to manufacture things on a mass scale. A simple example of this would be, say, washing machines, microwaves, or refrigerators or fridges, as we call them. They were being mass produced, in factories, and they were being imported or exported to other countries where there was a demand for these products. And this product phase was basically termed as mass production. Now, within the mass production phase, we also look at there are two definite phases that we can put out in the period of mass production. Is one of the phases led to a series of innovations or creation of innovative products, because obviously as the products were being produced, there was continuous improvement, processes also being applied, and that thereby the quality and the type of product or in terms of output which was being produced was also being improved. And this is something that we just get to see by Frederick Taylor's experiment of scientific management that he carried out, wherein he sought an experiment that he did within factory workers to say, and these experiments were primarily putting male and females together, putting females, in a very good environment, which was very well lit, clean, and having, air circulation and things. And then men being put in dark environments, or maybe on a factory floor wherein lighting or some of these things were compromised. And what he saw as an output of the experiment was that the output in terms of how people behaved, how motivated they felt, and what was the output they produced was far better than when you have men and women working together in say, for example, healthy and safe environments, which led to increase in production of goods and services. So this meant that if employers provided congenial environment with good resources to its staff to be able to work within those facilities, this would lead to innovation, this would lead to creation of newer products, and continuous improvement would as a process entail. And that is one of the phases where we see, in mass production, innovation being applied, or innovative ideas coming out of it, thereby improving the style, quality, design of products and services which were being manufactured. Then we see the innovation being brought across by Henry Ford when he launched Ford Motors in the 1898 or in the early 19th century. And we see that one of the concepts that he employed in terms of manufacturing cars was that he did not manufacture everything in one facility. He employed various suppliers to be able to manufacture certain parts, and the final assembly line happened, or assembly of these products happened within the factory. And thereby what he did was started introducing the concept of what is called skilled manpower and labor. That means people with different skills would be employed in different places, and that would allow the whole output to be better managed in order to produce a quality-driven product. And this method, which he implied, was basically based on the scientific management experiments which Frederick Taylor did, and that allowed the output of the factory to be controlled in a way wherein he could decide the pace at which production of some of these cars could happen on the assembly line. And then he segregated workers into unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled jobs, which further allowed, the production processes to be streamlined. Now we see the third period was the modern period, in which obviously the whole aspect of mass production was being done, but also at the same point in time, mass customization was being, employed. But during the process of innovation, we see Toyota coming out with, just-in-time system, Kanban, some of the improvement, areas or topics that we see in quality management, which were introduced as a result of these scientific experiments which took place during mass production era, led to improvements and techniques that we use today in operations management. So things like lean manufacturing, agile management, Kanban, just-in-time, continuous improvement, CI. These are techniques which originated out of the second phase, which was primarily then translated into modern phase, wherein mass production obviously started to happen. But at the same time, this approach helped in improving operations management or operations within a company significantly. So this phase of mass production is generally termed as modern period, and it is sometimes after 1970s. We see that because when markets started to become fragmented and product life cycles reduced. So for example, if people bought refrigerators, they were bought for 10 years, 15 years, but as the life of these products started to dwindle and more requirements started to crop about, we see the process of mass customization happening. And that is what we see in the beginning of the 20th century. And there were certain concepts that started to apply that have changed how operations management is now perceived. So things like flexible specialization, lean production, mass customization, agile manufacturing. These are processes which have now come about in the modern period of, or if we say, how operations management evolution has happened. We see these side of processes now being put into practice within the concept of operations management. So when we talk about flexible specialization, we see here that firms focus on, producing separate parts, which are produced by suppliers who have expertise in those production areas, and then they utilize those parts to be able to bring across in their product, assemble it, and then sell it. A simple example of that would be car manufacturing. So if you look at flexible specialization, car has lots of different types of parts. You have leather upholstery, you have tires, you have engine, you have chassis, you have lots of other, let's say, electronics and other bits which goes into the car. So a car manufacturer like BMW or Mercedes or Daimler Chrysler or General Motors, Toyota, whichever you look at, they have lots and lots of suppliers. And one of the reasons that you see why governments across the world are interested in allowing car companies to open manufacturing facilities in their own country is because they drive job creation as well. And that job creation is driven through ancillary industries growing. That means partners and suppliers supplying to the main provider of the product or manufacturer of the product. And that is where, flexible specialization as a concept starts to work. Firms develop long-term relationship, they create dependency, and that dependency allows them to utilize specific value-added skills which are required to produce goods to the best quality, and they are then integrated into the finished product sold by, say, a car manufacturer. Similarly, we look at lean production, which is a production system introduced by Toyota, and it focused on eliminating waste. So what they wanted to do was any such process which was producing waste, they focused on that. And what they wanted to do was reduce the amount of waste being produced by utilizing inventory. And that thereby allowed them to save cost and, or essentially reduce cost, cut cost, and increase profits or bottom line within the organization. Mass customization is when you look at, combining products and producing products in high volume, as well as adapting to various customer requirements in different markets. Now you look at an iPhone is mass produced, but it is also mass customized. So the iPhone sold in Germany comes with a German language pack. If you see it, the packaging is slightly different. The language is on the packaging is German. If I see it in France, it'll be French. If I see it in India, for example, or or in other countries like China, it will be Chinese or English or some vernacular, arrangement of introducing Hindi into it. And that would mean mass customization, thereby looking at satisfying and meeting needs of its customers by customizing the product, which is produced in volumes. But a customization means a specific value addition or a pack being applied for the product to be sold in a particular geography or nation. Agile manufacturing would typically be looking at paying emphasis on the needs of organizations to be able to switch from one market-driven objective to other. So when we look at companies, for example, adapting very quickly to the changes in consumer demand, in those cases, they employ what is called agile manufacturing. That means if the demand from the consumer changes, the company has the basic factory or the setup to be able to change and meet those requirements and demands by introducing a different product or a product which has been customized to meet the demand in that particular market. So, for example, if you look at some of the factories which companies have, for example, if we look at large manufacturers like Marks and Spencer, like clothing manufacturers, Zara, H&M, and all. So, if I give you an example here, they go through 4 different seasons of different types of clothes, but their factories are equipped and they have all the raw material, trained manpower, machinery to be able to produce these different types of clothes depending on the weather and the different seasons of the year. And that is where what they want to be able to look at is they understand that any setup that they do cannot just produce winter clothes or summer clothes or autumn clothes. The same factories, the same setups, the same machines will need to be creating and producing goods which are required in 4 different seasons when they are sold across different nations or different geographies, as far as that is concerned. So as far as clothes are concerned. So when we look at agile manufacturing, it is the ability of the organization to be able to switch to market-driven demand for products by utilizing processes which will allow it to cover a wider scale of let's say remit of consumer requirements and demand. And that is done because the organizations to agile means quickly able to switch or change processes to be able to meet the demands of the customer. And that is where agile manufacturing comes in. Any questions on this so far?
No.
All right. Let's look at briefly the role of an operations manager. Now, if you think on, and I would say if you put on your thinking hat and think for a minute in terms of what does the operations manager do. So an operations manager could be working in any organization, any company, any type of setup. But if you think of what are the various things which the people do when they are saying that they are in an operations role, which is where what we think of is, if I think of somebody who works within HR, the role of the person would be to manage the day-to-day requirements, queries, issues, problems of employees. And because there are a number of employees, an HR manager essentially would be dealing directly with them in order to pacify, meet, and satisfy their queries. And his or her role is going to be managing some of the key, resources, which is in order to, when I say key resources, I mean by that people and processes to be able to help run the organization efficiently. That means no strikes are there, no union action is happening, no balloting is happening, and the organization is, and people are happy, employees are happy. So operations managers would be involved in, HR would be an operations role, and they would be involved in making sure there are, contracts in place, incentive policies in place, reward mechanisms in place, review mechanisms in place, which will allow the company to use some of these processes to, check on the efficiency, productivity of the employee. And if they feel that these are bits which are not being managed, then they should be able to use these processes to, run those side of operations and streamline them. So when we talk about operations management, they take responsibility for a range of activities, which could be from producing of goods, services, issues, problems, looking at, planning, controlling, operating, and coordinating certain functions, even amongst departments, various departments within the organization. And this would be basically areas of operations. So when we talk about different departments in a company, Departments like finance, marketing, accounting, personnel, which is HR, engineering, manufacturing. These are all departments in which various types of operations are happening, and anybody managing that department or running that department would essentially be termed as an operations manager. Now, when we look at operations manager, what is the main role? And if you look at dividing that into three different types of decision making: strategic, tactical, and operational. We look at operations manager looking at mostly, taking, say, for example, tactical decisions, things like designing the operation system, managing them, improving them. And then some of the bits that they generally do is to look at how do they improve it: by improving quality, by introducing better quality of goods and services, by ensuring that proper inventory or stocking is there in the warehouse so that there is no break in the process of manufacturing, and ensuring inventory and supply chain side of things run smoothly with suppliers or external partners if they are involved. And last but not the least, ensuring the most important aspect, which is ensuring that people are available to be able to work on those processes. If you have a manufacturing facility or a company and that has a factory, and if there are no workers to run the factory, then obviously there are no operations or no output of products being produced when we look at operations management. So here it is important for the operations manager to look at taking tactical decisions to keep the day-to-day operation side of things running within the factory. Now, when we look at that, we do see one of the bits which operations manager employ, and that is basically planning, organizing, coordinating or leading, and controlling cycle. Now, this is a fundamental aspect of how management runs any sort of a process or any sort of a function within the organization. Management would look at planning. That means they would look at annual planning, setting goals and objectives, defining long-term, short-term strategies, and then detailing them out to ensure that everybody understands what their role is in that strategy in terms of their role and responsibility. And if they do their role and responsibility, and deliver the goods or deliver on that roles and responsibility, then the organization is able to achieve its objectives. So there's a lot of planning which goes into the management side of function. Then they also look at organizing. That means organizing would mean having a proper organizational structure, ensuring resources are available, ensuring that there are training and development side of things available for the resources to be trained to be able to take up those functions and then produce or help in the production of that output. Coordinating or leading would mean that in some cases, sometimes management would also look at dealing and in getting involved on the nitty-gritty basis. That means they would be looking at ensuring that the individuals are or people working within those side of things are motivated. So the HR side of things, finance side of things would come in to ensure there are incentive policies, reward mechanisms, salary and compensation side of things are appropriate with regards to market requirement and benchmarks. And these are levers which the organization or the management would use to control or say essentially coordinate in some cases by using them as an approach to get the desired output. So for example, if the company is trying to meet an aggressive sales target, the one part that they will look at in coordinating or leading would be to set up objectives in terms of reward mechanisms, which would motivate the employees to work more harder to achieve those goals. If they achieve those goals, they get incentives in terms of rewards, bonus trips, or holiday trips, or even cash incentives, things like that, to be able to coordinate this. They will also employ training and also ensure training events, seminars, meetings which happen so that everybody is on the same understanding and plane to be able to plane to be able to run and achieve those objectives. Controlling tends to be monitoring performance, comparing results, objectives against benchmarks which have been set or initially when planning was done. And some of these could be done through appraisals, could be done through year-end appraisals which are done, and reviews which are done by the management. And this is where the operations side of things, when we talk about operations cycle or operations management, you would generally see the POLC cycle being utilized in those cases. Now, when we look at some of the bits with regards to let's say, let's say roles of operations manager, we are going to be looking at different types of roles that we can get to see within, the organization. So when we talk about operations manager, this is an activity which I want you to do, and we'll fill up these slides before we discuss learning outcome 2, to understand if you know now operations and operations management, and if you were working as an operations manager within an organization, what would be your role? And the idea here would be to discuss what would be the role or the job function that you will have essentially when you work in say, for example, operations management, and your title or your designation generally is, say, for example, an operations manager, say, for example, for Subway, for example, or operations manager for McDonald's, or operations manager, in a Tesco store, or an operations manager in a Marks and Spencer store. What would be the role of or responsibility of the operations manager? So think of a particular role, industry, and then talk about in terms of operations manager. So if I say, for example, give you some hints here, I would say the operations manager role could come across in, industries like manufacturing, retailing, healthcare, hospitality, and other industries as well, like even in education. And that would basically be the operations manager role. They would be overseeing some part of the operations, and we will need to go into details. If I say logistics manager, this is where you would see them working within, say, manufacturing, retailing, transportation, military, or some of the other side of organizations. So think of responsibilities that they would be involved in. And when we talk about a supply chain manager or a supply chain specialist, they would be looking at overseeing, forecasting, procurement, production side of things, and their role could be in any of these industries. And the idea here would be to try and analyze, what do you think would that role involve? And when we talk about, say, an analyst, we are looking at different roles again of analysts, wherein they would be looking at, let's say, responsibilities of crunching data or identifying trends, and they would be looking at picking out peculiarities or any sort of abnormalities which they see as let's put it this way, aberrations in running the operations of that side of things. And that would essentially be, say, the role of I would say operations analyst. There could be other functions, things like you would also have maybe, say, production manager, somebody who works within the factory and obviously is responsible for, ensuring the production lines are running smoothly. And that could be one of the things that you could also discuss. You could also have other roles like, I would say, in this case, an inventory manager. So if I put it this way, somebody who manages inventory, an inventory manager would typically be looking at, making sure that raw material supplies essentially are available within the organization, if it is a manufacturing facility, and those are available generally on time in the, say, for example, factory to be able to be utilized for manufacturing. You could also have somebody like a process management specialist, somebody who's responsible for analyzing or looking into processes to streamline them, and that could be the process manager side of things. And their main aim would be to understand policies and processes and how they can be streamlined to ensure that they are optimum and they are apt for the production or production floor. You could have somebody like facilities manager. This would be somebody who's working within a particular factory or a site, and their aim is to look at ensuring physical assets or physical side of things like toilet facilities or infrastructure facilities. I would say office facilities, and safety side of things are taken care of, and they would be the facilities manager. You could also think of roles which could involve, purchase manager, which will be in conjunction with procurement and inventories manager. And they would be roles that you need to look into to understand how, what are the various types of roles that can be done or job roles which can be involved in working within operations management within an organization. Now, let's look at some of the other bits, which basically include, when you understand roles, we need to also know that what are these kind of roles going to be. And when we talk about these kind of roles, we are looking at understanding what are the skills which the operations manager would require. Now, one of the things that you need to know is there are different types of skills. There are soft skills, hard skills, there are technical skills. We are going to focus on understanding what are soft skills. Soft skills are skills which are basically your character trait or personality traits, and these are skills that basically help you work effectively within an organization. These skills you develop over a period of time. These are skills that are attributes which essentially you require to be able to work successfully within an organization. These skills would include skills like communication, teamwork, problem solving, time management. And if I say what are your personal strengths, or what are your strength areas, and when you talk about some of your strength areas by saying I'm a team player, or I have good communication skills, I'm a hardworking individual, they are generally termed as what are called soft skills, because they define your personality and they are characteristic of who you are as a person. Now, if we talk about technical skills tend to be skills that you are acquiring, gaining, or getting by learning something, or looking at some academic side of things that you do in terms of degree qualifications, and that allows you to essentially gain these skills. So when we talk about technical skills, these technical skills are skills which essentially you will see they are associated with a set of abilities or knowledge that you have gained by performing or studying, say, a certain let's say doing a degree. And these technical skills, if I put it this way, would allow you to gain specialist knowledge and expertise, which are essentially required for you to perform specific tasks in a particular role. So when I say a doctor, when I say an engineer, when I say a welder, when I say a joiner or a plumber or an electrician, they have specific skills that they have gained. And these are technical skills because they have gained them by studying certain qualifications or taking up certain courses. And this has helped them develop an expertise which is required to perform specific tasks. And with the use of specific tools that they utilize, they allow and exercise what are called these technical skills. So if I'm a programmer and I've learned coding on Python and Visual C or Java, I have programming skills and I've learned programming language, and that is a technical skill. That is not something that somebody will be able to do. If I learn a guitar and I've learned it over a period of year, 2 years by taking courses and coaching classes, then this skill is a technical skill because not everybody can play a guitar. So my skill would be to hum some songs or string some songs using the guitar, and that could be a technical skill that I've gained. So you doing this course and studying this course in business management and gaining this skill is going to be technical skills. So operations managers would typically be looking at having what are called soft skills and technical skills, which are required to do specific side of jobs, and they require what are called specific abilities and capabilities, which will allow you to then do these kind of job functions. So we need to be clearly aware that what are soft skills, what are hard skills, and what are technical skills to be able to understand some of these operational manager roles. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now let's look at some of the other topics that we need to cover in the unit one, learning outcome 1 today. One of the things that we need to look at is some of the theoretical models or frameworks which are involved in operations and operations management. Now, the first framework or model that we look at is transformational model of organization, wherein you look at inputs being transformed into output. But the transformation process is where the manufacturing, engineering, or operation side of things happen. So in this section, what we are looking at is analyzing what is transactional process. And transactional process is explained when we see this image below, which basically talks about the input, which is raw material. It could be anything. If I look at car manufacturing facility, materials that are coming in as upholstery, electronics, tires, chassis, iron, paints and things like that. They are all inputs. They are now undergoing a transformation process in the factory, which is where they will be transformed into finished products, which then can be used on the car assembly line to assemble the car. And the output, when it is rolling out of the factory or wheeled out of the factory in terms of a finished product, would be termed as output. So the basic transformation model applies in the case of manufacturing and engineering. And what we'll see, this model will also be applicable in service side of organizations and in both private and non-profit sectors. So every organization does something in order to have an effect or in order to make a difference in the market. Now, whether they are selling it for profits or they are selling it for charitable reasons or offering it for charitable reasons, but they will still follow that process, which is basically the transformational process or model that we generally get to see, wherein inputs are transformed into outputs. And that is where, the finished goods are essentially come in. Now, in the operational, when we talk about this from a concept of operations management, this systematic direction and control of processes that transforms input to outputs, which is basically output as finished goods or services for customers, is nothing but the transformation model that we look at. And this model helps us in understanding how inputs are converted into outputs, that means finished products, and the processes and various activities such as manufacturing, assembling, providing services, depending on the nature of the organization and how it transforms them into output, which are goods and services which satisfy customer needs, is essentially the transformational process or the model that we talk about. And any organization which employs this model, for example, if you keep an employee in customer service and you start building that department up, the reason why you're keeping or building that department up in terms of providing service to customers is because there are complaints coming or there are issues coming which need to be answered and resolved rather than have the return of products happening on a mass scale. So what the company then deploys is basically starts creating a customer service department which will look into some of these queries and problems being faced, and some of these could be easily reversed or met by just ensuring that you talk it through with the customer in terms of explaining the process of how things work, and that allows returns in this case, for example, to be minimized or reduced. And this would be termed as a transformational model because the company understands that the product they are selling might be complex in terms of installation and usage need, and they might need to, say, for example, create an extensive user manual, or maybe videos which the users can look at to understand how it needs to be utilized, rather than saying, okay, I don't like the product or I can't work with it, and that thereby leading to what is called unwarranted returns. So employing the transformational process by introducing customer service and introducing the aspect of speaking to customers to make them aware of how the product works is basically an example of, say, transformational model. And this is utilized by organizations to bring across improvements and obviously, in this case, as an example I've quoted, decrease the number of returns which are happening within the organization. Is that okay? A simple model, simple framework, input, transfer, process, and then output, and that could be employed in any situation within any organization which is offering products, goods, or services to customers. The second one that we look at is basically dimensions of operational processes, which is called the 4V framework, essentially. And this 4V framework that we talk about is basically a framework which talks about basically 4 different key areas within operations. One is volume. The second is variety, which is different types of products. Third is variation or customization in products with regards to demand, which is coming from the market. And last but not the least, visibility. Now, these are all different types of operational aspects which companies or businesses would need to use and understand so that they can decide why are they operating, how are they operating, what are the key competitive strengths that they have, what are their weaknesses, and what are the different approaches that they can take essentially to reach out to customers and make sure that their products and services are relevant to customers' requirement. Now, this 4V framework, if we explain this 4V framework, there are these 4 essential areas that we need to understand. What are the 4 V's in that? So the first V that we talk about is volume. So when we talk about volume refers to the quantity of goods or products or services which are being produced, handled, or processed by the company in a specific time frame. So if I say the car company produces, say, 1 million cars every year, this is the volume that we are referring to in terms of quantity that they produce when it comes to their manufacturing. And in order to produce this quantity, the company needs to determine the scale of their operations and resource requirement so that there is no lag or break in between in terms of production of these cars, which is what they are looking at producing on an annual basis. When we talk about variety represents the diversity and complexity of products and services which the company offers to its customers. And they would then need to employ processes that allow the organization to deal with this complexity of products and services it provides. So if they have a higher variety of products, that means different types of variants of models or products, then it also often requires more flexibility in operations to accommodate different variants. An example here that I would give is, again, sticking to the car industry. You have Mercedes, for example, as a car manufacturer. It has different types of models: Model A, Model B, C, E. It has Model S, Model M, and lots of other different types of models as well. Now, in between these models, it also has different variants. These variants are available in different countries with different configurations, and obviously that meet the requirement of that particular market. So in the European market, it might be selling models which are with radial tires, with air conditioning, but it is more tuned for both AC, hot and warm, which is warm air conditioning. But if the same car is sold in the Indian subcontinent, it would mostly have air conditioning, which is cold, not warm in general. It might have sleeker tires because of the road infrastructure. It might have higher suspension. So these are customization or variations in the models that they introduce. And because they need to hit price points, they might have, for example, models like automatic, which more or less are sold within the European geography. Very few people buy manual, models in terms of gearbox. But in the Asian geography, in order to reduce price points, they might offer manual, which is, manual gearbox, automatic gearbox, semi-manual gearbox. They might have certain features which are optional extras in the car, things like leather seat or upholstery, and some of the other features. And that would be basically looking at variety. So here the aspect of variety refers to diversity and complexity of products and services which the companies offer. And, it would then need to also ensure that it has its operations and resources, to be able to meet those requirements for customers. The other 2 V's are variation. So one of the V's, when we talk about variation, is it encompasses, any sort of fluctuation or changes in demand, which could happen in a particular market. And for that, changes in demand and fluctuations to be incorporated, the company should be ready to also adapt its production and processes, operational processes over a period of time. And this would mean that organizations need to manage the variation side of things in a way so that it ensures smooth operations and efficient utilization of resources to happen. And that would be variation. When we talk about visibility is basically, it pertains to the level of information and transparency the organization has about its processes. For example, how can you have something like a system in place which allows you to understand forecasting, supply chain, inventory management? So in such cases, the organization would employ software or certain type of say enterprise resource planning softwares which would allow suppliers, partners to look into and gain access to their supply chain or their inventory in the company or in the warehouse, and that would allow operations to be streamlined. And this would basically allow the company to employ just-in-time system, Kanban system, or continuous improvement system, which would mean that the company is actually not wasting resources in terms of time, quality, and cost, and utilizing them efficiently using the processes of operations management, which is basically also then allowing the management to take better decisions. So this is where these 4 dimensions help businesses understand and manage their operations effectively. They take into account, things like challenges which the company could face in terms of conditions which could be then, coming across from external factors or environmental factors, and they would then be in a better position to utilize this 4V framework to manage some of those, challenges which the companies and organizations can face because of changing, conditions in the market. Is that okay? Any questions on this?
No.
Okay. Now let's look at very briefly PESTEL. Now there are lots of external influences which the organization can have, and these would be influences that we are looking at studying from a point of view of globalization and sustainability. So when we talk about operations management, we are primarily focused on streamlining operational processes. That means internal processes within the company to, bring efficiency into the process of, say, working on a day-to-day basis. Give you a simple example here. Within our organization, we receive, say, for example, 10 to 15 applications from, learners overseas or from abroad. Now, we have a system that we employ, but when the customer or a learner actually fills up an application form, this is then transferred onto our CRM system. And from the CRM system, we use certain activities to send out an offer letter, invoice, and other bits. Now, if the parts of these systems are broken, that would mean that people will need to intervene to update certain fields like phone number or address or postcode. And that would mean that time is being utilized on manually fixing some of these things which are broken in the form. So if the fields on the website are not matching with the fields of the CRM, then what will happen is a lonely part populate the field in the CRM, and that would mean manual intervention would need to be done. Now, assuming you get 10 to 15 such applications every day, and those then have to be sent across as offer letters, invoices, and things like that, you would see there's a fair bit of operations which will happen. And in order to streamline this, what we will have to look into is processes of where it is not actually working or why is it not populating the required field areas within the CRM from the website form. And if we understand some of these side of things, then we are able to what is called streamline some part of the process, which would require lesser manual intervention, and some of these things could happen automatically. So when we talk about the factors which could affect the workings of this form, they might be internal, but because the information from customer is not being filled properly on the various fields on the form, that would mean that an external aspect of the form in which the information is coming from the learner. Sorry. So this information is not being fed properly, and that is why it requires intervention. So operations side of things would be looking into how do we streamline this? How do we make it much more efficient and provide instructions to learners at the time when they fill up the form in terms of what information is required in this field. And if that is provided, that would allow a better output or input in this case into the CRM be possible. So understanding some of the internal and external influences which can affect how the organization works can sometimes help in improving the efficiency and productivity of employees and processes within the organization. And one such model that we look at which helps us do is PESTEL, because it helps us understand what are the environmental factors which are affecting companies working on large scale here. So when we are talking about organizations which are predominantly, let's say, working on a global scale. So factors which are political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental, if we know these factors and how they're affecting we can then, obviously look into them to make changes in the production process or in the manufacturing process, or maybe in the assembly side of the process, to ensure that our operations are being streamlined, they are reducing cost or utilizing less time, and make sure that they are producing high quality products, which would thereby meet the requirements of the customers and demands from the customers. Now, there's not much that we can look at in terms of pestle, but what we have to look at what are the external factors which can affect, the operations or operations of a company which works on a global scale. So here, when we look at specifically employing pestle analysis for globalization and sustainability, we need to look at how would this affect an organization. So when we talk about globalization, we are looking at the world being interconnected. The organizations have different branch offices, international operations, and obviously if one side of the business in one country, if the country is facing a downturn or recession or decreasing demand, how can the company adapt by moving products inventory into another location where there is demand and there is let's say this particular inventory that they have, excess inventory, can be utilized in that location. So the impact that we have to look at from an operational management point of view would mean that sometimes companies have to look at supply chain, to streamline supply chain, to reroute some of the products using supply chain into a different country, look at standardization versus localization. So if iPhone, for example, is not selling because of certain reason in German, and there is a piled up inventory of 50 million phones in Germany, then if the company has to decide to move that phone and sell it in other markets, it will need to do some changes to the packaging, wherein the packaging might need to change to the language. The phone might need certain iterations in terms of language variations. So these decisions would impact operations of that company, which is Apple. And in this case, when they look at managing inventory and supply chain, they look at studying the demand, and with the demand being studied, they also look at making projections. Forecasting is done, and then appropriate amount of inventory with a certain, say if the demand is 100, probably 110 phones would be shipped to that country, rather than having, if the demand is 100,000 phones being shipped. So this bit has to be looked at from a point of view of meticulously, streamlining using operations management. They will need to look into factors like competition, how much of product, import duties apply, so that if import duties are higher, that means companies in the long term will have to look at localizing the product or utilizing local manufacturing facilities to get parts locally, which would allow it to reduce cost, and then look at other aspects of, requirements from, I would say, market perspective. And that would be factors that they would need to look at from a globalization perspective. When you look at sustainability, it would be factors which they are looking at driving the business or running the business for a longer period of time. And how would that be more sustainable? That means it would be looking at meeting environmental compliances, looking at ensuring that they have, facilities and machinery in place, which is environmentally friendly. Resources that they have are essentially looking at not increasing costs, but also looking at, optimizing the cost over a period of time. And these would be sets of decision-making things which the operations management would need to look into when they talk about sustainability. When we talk about, globalization and global availability or selling things globally, and then also looking at ethics side of things, we are also looking at that increasingly these are becoming important because of legislation compliance in different countries, which companies have to comply with. Legislation has become a major, let's say, bottleneck for companies which are expanding or having operations across many countries. So they have to adhere to legislation and laws in that country. And in order to ensure that they do not, get fined or maybe have restrictions imposed on them, they have to ensure that they are ethically operating in that environment by meeting and complying to the laws and legislation laid down by the government. Sometimes you would see companies do global sourcing. That means they are basically sourcing products from different countries, bringing it into a particular facility, and then manufacturing it and then assembling it. So in such cases, what you will generally see that the companies will need to meet different requirements of sourcing. And obviously looking at, when we say sourcing, they will need to look at import, exports, and various moralities which are involved in dealing with global sourcing will need to be taken into account. A simple example that I would give you here is, say, for example, if we consider and stick to the car manufacturing industry, we take up an example of, say, Nissan Motors in the UK, or a company which manufactures cars in the UK. Now, sometimes you would see that some parts of these cars are coming in from factories in Poland, in Slovakia, or in other places, say, for example, in Japan, because engines and other bits are coming from Japan. Some parts of the manufacturing in terms of chassis and bodies are coming from Poland, but the final assembly is happening within, the Nissan factory in Sunderland. So when we look at, they are sourcing certain parts. For example, let's go into detail. Bulbs which are required, or electronics which are required, systems which are required, which are navigation systems, it's being imported from Germany. Now, because the company is importing a lot of products and it has lots of different suppliers from which it is importing, it will need to make sure that it has given projections, it has given some commitments that we'll be looking at buying 500,000 such systems. Or if you look at Michelin tires, if it comes from France, they will look at buying, say, for example, a car utilizes 4 and 1 spare tire. Then obviously, if they're manufacturing 100,000 cars, that would mean 5 million of these tires are required. So giving projections and forecasting to suppliers would help lower cost, and also give them the ability to be able to manufacture these on time, with expertise involved in terms of some of these products, because the company cannot manufacture tires themselves. So they have to give it to somebody else. And when they utilize their expertise to get high quality products, that would allow them to get advantage against their competitors. And all these features and aspects have to be taken into account when we talk about global sourcing. So global sourcing can pose advantages and obviously challenges. So if we are looking at 5 million tires, and if your car sales slows down in the UK and you already have an inventory of 20,000 vehicles, you sell 100,000, you have inventory of 20,000, you would need to ask the tire manufacturer to start slowing down production of tires that it needs for manufacturing of cars in the UK, because they already have a built-up inventory. So here it would pose them logistical problems, which is in terms of warehousing, storage, and inventory. So these things will have to be looked into closely to understand how global and ethical sourcing of suppliers and supplies can pose challenges, which are challenges to organizations, and how does operations management step in? How does the role of an operation manager or operations management as a field steps in to solve some of these problems, which have to be looked at from a point of view of globalization, sustainability, and global sourcing. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So in conclusion, when we look at some of the aspects of what we have discussed today in operations management, we have looked at, say, for example, certain areas in the operations management which would allow us to, let's say, build a good amount of understanding in terms of why it is very important for organizations to have this as an important function within their organization. And when we say sometimes operation management, we also use the term OM, operations management in short, because it helps the organization or the management people working within this field to prioritize on certain activities and look at certain practices which would help the company achieve maximum efficiency as a means to achieve maximum profitability, because most businesses are set up for maybe making, for profits. But when we look at companies and organizations and businesses working, they are looking at the process side of things. And the process side of things means operation managers or operations management, which is going to help the organization utilize resources in a way which will allow them to optimize them for the processes or functions of efficiency, productivity, and achieving the primary goals of making profits for the organization. So that is in general, the summary of learning outcome 1 that we've studied today. And then we will continue our discussions tomorrow for learning outcome 2 in terms of going into details of, understanding how do we apply a range of techniques and some of the frameworks which operations managers use for the purposes of running, planning, controlling, and coordinating operations within a particular setup or an organization. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Good stuff. Any questions on this so far?
No.
No.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and upload 1 or 2, obviously all the presentations, but also I'm going to try and do upload of some articles on Moodle, and they would be a good read to bring yourself up to date with some of the bits that we've discussed today, the 4V framework in particular, the POLC cycle, planning, organizing, leading, and controlling, and then the management side of functions, which are related to roles of managers that you need to look into and, come back with regards to some bit of discussions that we will start, tomorrow. So different roles or different type of, let's say, job roles which can be done or taken up by people who work within, operations management, and that would need to be explored at your end as a bit of a homework. Let's put it this way today. Okay.
Okay.
Good stuff. So thanks for joining in today. I will see you guys tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow morning, and then we'll discuss our learning outcome 2 from there.